You have to firewall to extend their alarm system. That's already.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming out. I want to welcome you to the special call city council meeting this Wednesday, January the 27th, at approximately 6:13 p.m. Ms. Terry, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Lance Terry.
Here.
Ron Powell.
Here.
Danny McDaniel.
Here.
Tim Terry.
Here.
Ralph Baker.
Here.
David Brown.
Here.
To the full board.
Thank you very much. We have one item on the agenda tonight. It is the, I'll call hopeful adoption of the 2021 City of Greenwood budget. So I will turn it over to Mr. Marsh.
Why?
Just you're the number. You're the man.
The number guy.
You're the number guy.
I'll just let Stuart pass.
Oh yeah, fire chief.
I want to see their eyes. You should have the budget, the whole budget, on your tablets. There are two copies that are hard copies up here at the table, one on each side of the room. If you'd rather look at the hard copy, put into place by departments. So there's one and there's one over here if you'd rather do that. Rather than go through each individual department, we had already pretty much done that during the budget study sessions previous. I'm going to give you the highlights, like I did last year, of what does the budget show as far as where were we, where are we going, what's the pulse of the city as far as the budget is concerned. The first thing I want to point out up here on the screen is the 2020 capital carryover cost, as well as the non-capital cost and the total carryover. These are expenses that we anticipated incurring in 2020 that did not get incurred. Obviously, it was an anomaly year, as you know, and there was a lot of pullback on some of the expenses that we were scheduling to do that due to the COVID and the health emergency and the pandemic were slowed down, if even attempted. And they're now being pushed into the 2021 budget. But I wanted to give you some breakout of what those costs are and that they are reflected in the actual individual departments' budgets for 2021. And you'll see each of the department breakout here, and you'll see how much money was capital, how much money is non-capital, and what the total carryover would be. So that number is going to come into being and play in several of the slides. I just wanted to give it to you once so that you have in your mind the carryover total is 2.6 million, and the 2.2 million of that, or right at 2.3, 2.29, is coming directly from capital improvements and capital expenditures. So you've already seen those numbers when we reviewed at the study sessions each individual budget. You just didn't see it in that presentation. The next thing I wanted to show you was the revenue stream and what the revenues look like, and those numbers are probably a little hard for you to look at, I believe, so I can actually bring them out. But what I wanted to show you the column-wise is by department. This is by operating department, our revenues. This would be the approved and amended budgets that we had for 2020. This was the actual revenues that we received in 2020. What I do want to point out is that the general and admin department does reflect the CARES Act monies that we received, both in the budget side, because you approved the modification to the budget to accommodate it, and the actual side. So it's in both.
I have my glasses on and I can't
I'm
see.
going to bring that up a little bit. So now you can see a little bit better. This 1.6 million in the operations of the general department and the actual 1.62 off by $21,000. The number is in both. Our proposed budget for 2021, if you go down to the bottoms here where the total revenues, our budget last year, amended budget for 2020, was $10,199,000 in revenues. The actual revenues was $10,497,000, or a difference of $297,000. That's right under 3% growth in our revenue stream. Now remember, the revenue, that percentage right there would be the same because both these numbers have the CARES Act money in it. So the variance that we had was a growth we would have had anyway of 3%. Our current proposed 2021 budget is $10,506.34. No, $10,506,345, and that growth is right now 0.09%. So basically what we're doing, given the fact that there's still some uncertainty, is that we're looking all in citywide a flat budget revenue stream-wise. It is flat. Now there are some exceptions to that, but overall when you look at 52% of our revenue stream comes from city and county sales tax. The rest is made up of turnbacks and various other revenue sources. And throughout the year, I've given you what those are. This number right here reflects no additional monies coming from any sort of CARES grant or COVID funding or reimbursements. That's assuming we're not getting any more dollars for that. The variance that we had is $306,000 when you look at the variance budget to budget wise. So there's a 3.01% growth in our budget from budget to budget. Now what I want to do is I want to share with you I want to go to this screen, which I'll bring up.
Greenwood City Fire, Portsmouth to Greenwood City Fire, use either 1019 to 24 West President Street or West President Street. Be advised, advertise permit page 24 West President Street, 24 West President Street for a broken gas meter.
Speaking of the fire buddy while he's gone. Turn to page.
Okay. What I wanted to show on this screen, which is bigger so you can see the numbers better, is that our budget that we had in 2020 was $10 million. The actual revenues was $10,497,000. However, I took the noise out, which is the CARES Act, to show what our actual growth would be without the impact of the CARES Act's $354,000. So that would have put our actual revenues down to, if we didn't get that money, to $10,142,000. The variance there would be $363,000. So literally our proposed budget growth without the impact of the CARES Act is 3.57, or right at 3.5%. So our budget, taking the noise out and the anomaly that we occurred, which was the CARES Act money, we're growing our revenue budget at 3.5%. So otherwise it's going up just 0.9. And by the way, this right here, 2.9% or 3%, is a really good estimate of our proposed or projected revenue streams. Hopefully we'll, based on some of the numbers that have just recently come in the month of January for the city sales and use tax and county, we'll be close to that number as well. 3% growth in revenue is about what we've had year over year. All right. Next thing I want to show you would be the expenses. All right. The budget, ooh, don't touch that button. Get it off. Let that go away. All right. The adopted and amended budget column right here shows that we had last year a budget of $12,009,319. The actual expenses was $9,208,000. We had a variance of $2.8 million. Remember, I told you, if you see just below that, the numbers that are down here, 2.8 million less the 2.6 million, which is the carryover expense, leaves a favorable variance to budget of $153,000. That is a 1.28% favorable percentage lower than what our budget was in the expense side, or on the expense side. That was the ability of each department to manage their operating budgets. And they came in under budget by 1.28% last year. The 23% that you see up there reflects the fact that we're carrying over the 2.6 million out of this into this 13 million that's sitting up there, 13,524,000. So when you compare the budget for this year to the budget amount that we had last year, there is a growth rate of 12.61%. Take out the 2.6, and it's really a decrease in your expenses that are not resulting in the carryover of about 9%. I think the greatest number to look at is that is our budget right there. Our budget includes 2.6 million of carryover expense, so our budget is $13,524,000. That's what the city's budget is going to be. So now we have to look at how do we fund that? How do we make that happen on a $10 million revenue stream? And how you do that is you look at what our fund balances did last year to this year. Our budgeted revenues right now is that $10,506,000. Our budgeted expense is $13,524,000. So we're going to have our total revenues come up to balance the budget to the tune of $3,017,000. So we're going to have to go into our funds applicable to each one of these departments and pull out $3 million in order to balance the budget. That's a 28% increase, or what I call funding requirement, in order to balance the budget. Now on the surface, that's like gasp. But what I'm going to tell you, if I go into the next slide, is that our fund, because we didn't spend that $2.6 million last year, grew 30.7%. Our fund budget was supposed to be $10,201,000. We ended at $13,332,000, or $3,131,000 above what we were supposed to be had we incurred those expenses that were carried over. So we'll use that 30% there to offset the this 28% right there, and that's where the funds are coming from. So don't panic on that. That's well taken care of in the fund balances. All right? I also wanted to point out that the budget up here does reflect the CARES Act, and as well as the A&P tax revenue. That's been increased by the $2,000. So it is adjusted for the CARES Act in there. So even though the CARES Act monies went in there, we're still 30% higher in our fund balance than we anticipated to be at the beginning of the year, citywide. We go to the next screen. It's a little busy, but I will show you that what I did is, now you're saying, well, why don't we show how it impacts the budget when you take out the $2.6 million from the expense side, just to come down to a number of what was the funding requirement for this 2021 budget, absent of the noise of the carryovers. So that column over here, which I'd like to be able to bring now. This column of $10,876,000 is our revised carryover of net of the carryover of our expenses for the city. If that's the expenses for the city, and we have this is our revenue of $10,506,000, the $3 million that we originally were going to do, less the offset of the carryover from that, means that we would be, in order to balance the budget just for 2021, removing the noise, you would end up with a 3.53% funding requirement, or $370,000 on a $10 million budget, 3%. That's not bad. Okay, it'd be nice if that were going the other way, but that doesn't always happen. There are needs that the cities have. Usually it has to do with equipment that gets fully depreciated and needs to be replaced. There's a lot of capital needs that go into that. And I'm going to show you some interesting statistics in the capital side too. That's going to put your mind at ease as to how is this funding requirement going to be returned back to the city and to the citizens of the city, and how are we going to spend that money in this expense column? So this would be the, well, that's just basically what I just showed you. It's the funding. What we're dealing with right here is the fact that I've showed you, we increased our fund by 30%. The proposed budget is that we're going to reduce our amount for our fund. If we balance our budget, we're going to reduce the budgeted fund for all in for the city to about 10,800,000, and I believe it is a little over 10,898,000. So when you take the 10,000,008 and you compare it against the 10,000,002, which is where we ended the year, we actually have a 6%, or right at a 6.83% growth in our fund balance. So even though we're pulling money out to fund and balance our budget to the tune of 3%, 3.5%, our fund is growing 6% when you take everything into consideration. So the proposed budget is going to grow from our last year's budget, the fund balance by 6%. Or, I think the number's under there, Mayor can read it better than I can. Right there, it says 2021 budget to budget.
It's a 6, yeah.
Yep.
600 and something.
697,
697, 117 is what we're looking to add, about a little over $500,000 to our fund balance. If that budget's met, if everything is spent and everything comes in exactly as that budget is projected. I'm comfortable with that. Now this is the capital side. This is what I wanted to point out to you. What you have here is the budget capital expense for 2020. This is the budgeted capital improvement expense for 2020 for a total of $3,845,104. That's what we budgeted last year to spend in capital. We only spent $1,007,000. So I've already shown you that there's a $3.6 million in carryover, but of that, 2.296812 is the capital carryover. So we're budgeting $4,693,000 in 2021 to pick up the projects that were last year that didn't either get finished or paid for or started, and we're going to rebudget them in this year. So what I wanted to do is break out how much money that was as the carryover and determine how much is new capital projects that are budgeted for 2021. All in, all city. It's $2,396,000. So that's about a 50-50 split. 50% of what we're spending our money on is going to be projects that didn't get done, paid for, or started last year. And this year we're going to be spending about 50% of the total budget for new projects, which are in each of the breakouts of all the departments. And you can see the dollar amounts right here, what they are. This is the capital expenses by department, and this would be the capital improvements by department. You see where the lion's share of it comes from the water sewer side. What I'd like to do is show you down here the breakout of what is this $4 million as a representation of our total expense, the percentage of capital expenditures to total expense, and the percent of capital expenditures to revenue. Last year, our budget was 32% of our capital expenditures was the makeup of our total expenditures. This year it's 34.7%. So we're increasing our investment in the capital improvement side and the capital expenditures of the city. So about a third of the money that comes in, that we're budgeting for expense rather, goes out in the way of capital expenditures to the city. Right back into the infrastructure and things that support the city and the services that the city provides. As far as the revenue is concerned, 37% of the capital monies in 2020 were were the percentage of revenue that we brought in. This year, it's 44.67%. So right now, about 45, rounded up, 45% of our revenue that comes in is budgeted to go out in a capital manner, to capital infrastructure and capital improvements. 45% of the revenue. That's taxpayers' dollars going right back into the city, going back into the city services and the plant. And that's pretty good. I mean, that's a good way of saying this is what we're doing with your money. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was budgeted compensation. What you see here is the all-in city compensations from 2017 all the way to 2021. 2017, we were 2.8 million. 2021, we're 3.1 million. The percentage year-over-year increases are listed for you. The percentage increase between 2021 and 2020 is 1.3%. 1.3% growth in our all-in city budget for compensation, wages. Uncanny is that down here there's a footnote, the Social Security cost of living adjustment for 2021 is also 1.3%. The city's all-in compensation is only increasing the actual percentage of the total. If you were to look between this period of time and this period of time, since 2017, the city's growth in salaries and compensation, budget growth, this is all budget, not actual, was 10% over this 5-year period. Those are the numbers. Now, the biggest thing that I wanted to point out was general and admin. Remember, we had a special budget session, some of you weren't here for, when we dealt with where the funds were, the actual fund balance for the unassigned general fund. That was what was causing me some headache. And we were looking at whether the $354,000 for the CARES Act should be considered a contingency, and we assign it as a contingency fund. I showed you some statistics, and I'll re-show them to you about where the city was headed year over year with the unassigned general fund monies, which are not restricted. There's several departments, as I illustrated to you, that fall under that. This right now is the 2020 budget for the general and admin department. And what you're seeing here is the general fund checking account, or the fund balance. The total unassigned general fund checking as of December 31st, 19, or we like to say 1/1/20. When we started the year, that fund had a $1.1 million balance. That's the unassigned general purpose money. The general departments, which are not general and admin, but the fire, police, animal control, planning, parks, all falling under the general department, their operating funds was budgeted at a deficit of $478,535. The surplus from 2020 for just the general and admin department was this $606,000, 668,000, I believe. Somebody's going to confirm. Yeah. 709, correct.
13.
That leaves us a total unassigned general fund balance as of the end of this year at $1.364 million. That does tie to what you will see in the detail in a minute. The 2021 estimated revenue over expense just for the general and admin department, that's finance, the mayor's office, just the general and admin, is a positive surplus of $304,000. So that brings our unassigned general fund balance up to $1.6 million. The general department's surplus or deficit for 2021 is budgeted now at $652,000, which will leave us, if the budget is achieved, a total unassigned general fund balance in 2021 of $1,016,000. We are at that $1 million number that I'm comfortable with as far as where I think the general fund should be. But we have a very scary trend that we talked about that we're going to have to do something with in the next coming years. And I'm going to show you that on this next slide. Well, here's the breakout of departments. This was the actual 2021 amount. This $1,174,000 is there, the $354,000 CARES Act, 314. That's your 16 that I was talking about. You drop off all of these departments here that were both surpluses and or deficits for the year, you end up with that $1.3 million number. You carry that over to the beginning of this year, and this is the budget right now. So there's where that $1,016,000 comes from. This number, as you recall, in our first meeting that we had, everybody looked at, and was worried because it was like $720,000 as a subsidy. And I mentioned in that conversation that the police department does not have any kind of sales tax, city sales and use tax relief for capital. None. It has to come straight from the general fund's operating budget. And then you look at some of the other departments, such as Parks and Fire. Both of those departments have city sales and use taxes for their capital needs and for other purposes. And a lot of the cost that is in the operating budgets that come out of the city's general and admin unassigned funds really are monies that by law can be funded by their city sales and use tax. So we talked about potentially going through and taking a hard look at shifting some of the costs back to where the taxpayers dedicated that money to be used from instead of coming out of the unassigned. Our goal, my goal, is to try to build a contingency fund for the city. And we're in a trend right now that I don't think is very positive. This is the trend that I was trying to show everybody. In 2017, we ended this was the actual balance that we had in 2017 of $1.2 million. We estimated 2018, our budget said we would end with $1,016,000. In 2018, we ended really with $1.2 million. We budgeted 2019's fund balance to go to, this unassigned fund balance to go to $990,000. We actually ended with $1,001,000. We budgeted $880, I think it is, somewhere in that neighborhood. 879, or right at 880. Right? And then we ended up on either one of these two numbers. We either ended up saying we're going to reserve and assign the $354,000 CARES Act to the contingency, or we're going to use the CARES Act money and into our general fund, into our general unassigned. And we're not going to assign it. We're just going to roll it into our funds and use it for general fund purposes. And that's what we elected to do, because if we didn't and we pulled it out and kept it restricted, we would have been at $661,000. And what you're seeing here is the drop here is 2.5%, the drop here is 11%, the drop there is 24%, almost 25%. Can't do that. Keep doing that, you're not going to have any general fund money for your unassigned. By moving the $354,000 out of any kind of an assignment and putting it into the general coffers, our estimated balance as of 12/31 will be that $1,016,000, which basically rebases us back to 2018's level. So that's what we did. We just basically put ourselves, went back in time and said, we are now increasing our estimated fund balance over the previous year by 15%. And we're now back here to the 2018 level. But we still need to, next year's budget, study and look at ways to help offset and mitigate that decline. Because that is not something you can sustain just to show it to you in numbers and actual percentages, these are the actual fund decline from 17 to 20, 20.43%, because I've added 17 in there. The budgeted funds dropped 27.87%. Now the variance between what was actually budgeted and what actually incurred is a favorable variance of $561,000. Remember, the budget's scary, but we don't always hit it. We're always about $250,000 up from that. Now, should I say, oh, I'll expect that? Now, I expect this number right here to be 1.2 million, or 1.26 million. I'd love to do that, but that's telling us we've got some fundamental issues. If there's no anomaly increase in revenue or some kind of a major decrease in expenses that just all of a sudden happens throughout the year, it's basically in the fact that might be some kind of a fundamental flaw in the actual budget process, which we need to be looking at. A little harder. A lot of it has to do with wants and needs. Could be a little bit of over budgeting in an area because you're unsure. There's a lot of economic conditions right now that are happening that has an impact to whether or not we're going to meet that budget or not. I don't know what gas prices are going to do, but everybody locked into a gas, a fuel, cost in their budget. We can blow that out of the water if the prices go up significantly. So it's basically, there's no real rocket science to it other than historical. And looking at projections down the road, which departments are looking to me for, to give them what do I see as far as the economic projections in consumer index, price index is going, to monitor what I think the rate of inflation should be as far as our historical plus. This is the actual restricted amount for the general monies. So at the end of 2020, we were at 1.592 million, and these are all the different categories of the restrictions. We sort of color coded. Blue is police, red is fire. Parks was green, but it was so green that you couldn't see the numbers. So anyway, and water sewer is not up there because it's not part of the general fund. Neither is street. So these are all monies that are assigned and or restricted by these laws. Now, the only way to take out and move some of this stuff back to the general fund, for instance, those that are done by the resolutions, which like right here, Resolution 11807, is to repeal the resolution or do a new resolution on how you want to dictate that money to be used. But a lot of these are monies that are donated monies that are for a restricted purpose. Even though there's no law that restricts it, you restricted them as a city council. So 2021, 13.23% decrease. A lot of that had to do with I shifted some money over in order to ease some of the burden and some of the pressure on the general unassigned funds.
Quick one minor, your 11,150 for Kimball should be zeroed out.
Which one?
Freight
It is
Kimball
zeroed
Water
out.
Fund.
Zero now, right there. Zero out.
Okay.
This was the balance
Gotcha.
as of
I
12/31.
just saw the 445, just making sure.
The 445 has been donated, and it's zero, and it will be zero unless some additional happens. But it is zero, yes.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Now we want to get into, everybody looks at the police, and we had a big, long discussion about that large number in the police as far as the budget was concerned, $500 and some odd thousand. Well, they're an operating department of the city under the general department. The police budgeted expense from 2007 all the way to 2021. That's what it cost each of those years to run the police department. Right there. I will tell you that we went back to the drawing board, and the number for 2021 over what it was in 2020 is now 4.5% lower. Budgeted expense is 4.5% lower, 4.64%. The average actual expense, and it's only during the 17 through the 21 period of time, for these 4 years was $1.632 million to run the department. Now the variance, this is the actual expense variance between the budget and the actual expense incurred, is slightly under $400,000. So you look at about $100,000 they're going to miss each year for various reasons. We talked about some of them at the last budget study session, which is personnel, mostly personnel purposes. People that they budgeted that they didn't hire because they can't find them, or they're not there, there's a lack of interest or whatever. But that doesn't undermine the fact that they need those positions. So that's the expense side. This is the revenue side from 2007 to 2021. The problem is that from 2016 back, you can't compare it. These are not apples to apples. The way that they did the revenue stream, even with the city sales and use tax, is that they actually, the general fund, before 2017 occurred, we went to converted from QuickBooks over to CenterPoint, is that they actually wrote a check from general and transferred it to the police department as a subsidy. So they actually subsidized them for the check. We don't do that anymore. We literally just subsidize it in the general department as an operating department under general. We can do that now with our fund accounting software that's integrated to do that. So 2017 down, and you can do a comparison of. This is the actual revenue with the city's county, rather, not the city, the county sales tax included in that. So what you're seeing here is the percentage change over the 2020 budget. So this would be this number to this number is a negative 5.5%, 5.25% rather, drop in revenue. A lot of that happened because we're budgeting kind of flat right now, but it happened because of a lot of downturn in municipal fines and fees, for instance. We lost a lot of revenue in that respect. As far as the actual revenue, though, is concerned, remember that's the budget. We're not aggressively budgeting here. The actual, though, was only a decrease in our amount of 1.42% change over the 2020 actual. 1.15 versus 1.99, 1.4%. So it's pretty flat, is all we're saying. We're budgeting the revenue stream for the police department to be flat in 2021. Oops, drop back one more. This is the subsidy. This is what the general fund offsets the deficit between the revenues and the expenses for the police department to operate. This was the subsidy for each of the years. This is the number you didn't see on that other slide. 2007 to 2016, and then every year after that. So all 15 years here, the budgeted subsidies. The average subsidy that you see here is 14 years divided, this number right here added up, divided by 14 is this average subsidy. What I did is I also did the average subsidy only for the years 17, 18, 19, and 20, divided it by 4, and this was the average subsidy over the last 4 years. So you see the subsidy requirement dropped. So all the numbers for the police department, while it's a big number, it's going in the right direction. If you'll look at the 2020 and 2021 period of time, you'll look at the increase over the 2020, we're looking at a decrease in our subsidy of 0.29%. Actually, the subsidy request is going down, even with a lower budgeted revenue and a slightly higher budget, or no, a lower budget in expense and a lower budget in revenue. Now, what you see here is the increase over the average. So this amount increased over this average by 7.87%, but the actual subsidy, this is what we budgeted, that's what we actually gave. The actual from the current budget, this 686 and the 593, was a decrease of 13.5%.
Tom, do those figures take into account the municipal court distributions?
Yep. Municipal court distributions are now distributed directly to police departments' books.
So that's not included in those?
It is in those.
Oh, it is in those?
Now,
It's
these
only
are,
about 75,000 though.
Hmm?
Right, it's only about 75,000 a year.
yeah, it's
It's
not,
not a huge commission.
it's not that significant in 1.7 million, but it is significant to them. Yeah. The police budgeted expense, the police budgeted revenue, and the police subsidy trends. I wanted to show you what that looked like. So the budgeted expenses are going up. You do see, though, that there is a downturn in the budget from the expense perspective, and this is the actual right here. So the police actual expense is going flat, if not lowering. It's not keeping or going up and incurring as much as the actual budget is concerned. You do see that the trend lines are getting closer together, which means that we're getting closer to what we're spending, closer to what we're budgeting. There's not a wide gap. One of the things that you don't like to see in budgeting is a big gap between what your actual was and what your budget was. If there's a huge gap there, there's some problem fundamentally in how you're doing your budget. You want these lines to be fairly close. The police revenue trend over the 5-year period actually crossed in 2020 due to the anomaly that we had as far as big slowdown in the revenue stream. And then the police subsidy trend, this is the actual subsidy, this is the average, this is what the budget was. You see the budget is flat, if not slightly lower. The trend line is fairly flat in the actual subsidy. I'm very good with where we are as far as the subsidy and what we're doing for the police department. Those numbers support that they're not mismanaging the department, they're doing what they need to do, and they're providing a service to the citizens of the city. As far as whether they have the appropriate number or the appropriate pieces of equipment that they need, that's something that would have to be answered by the actual chief, and not by me. But the numbers support a fairly stable operation. As far as the county sales tax is concerned, this is where I talked about pre-distribution amounts, and I talked about how the police department gets 50% of the distributable amount of the the county sales tax. You control that distribution. I do want you to know, however, that if you were to just merely move percentages between each of the distributable departments over to police, you're not really doing anything to the overall deficit spending you're not affecting the unassigned. You're just moving it within departmental category. It's still going to be, one will be a little higher number, and the other one will be now a little lower number. The way that you would affect positively the department's deficit is that you would have to move expenses away from the county sales tax rather, to a city sales and use tax category to where they have relief. And there's only 2 departments in there that have that relief right now. And that is parks and fire. Those are the only 2 that you could move away some of this percentage to police because they have no capital avenue, and force them to go back and look a little more long and hard at what expenses are there that are not payroll and payroll related, employee related expenses, and move them to an area where they have relief, which is city sales and use tax. I'm not suggesting you do that, especially this year right now. That's an avenue that we could look at for next year's budget. I have gone through and moved some in order to take $100,000 out of this budget. I will get into this dollar amount as revenue up there in just a second. I do want to point out to you these are the little restrictions. Let me go back. Let me see if I can pull that up. See if you read it, maybe. There we go. This is your ordinance, and this is what the section 4, 5, and 6 refer to from the purposes of city sales and use tax for firefighting. This is the fire, this is the parks, this is street. This is your restrictions on the monies. It says it does not include payment of wages, salaries or wages, and I would say, and that would include all in, that would include the taxes, it would include the retirement, it would include anything that's employee-related expenses. expense. I would keep those in the operating department, but I would move, potentially anything else is subject to be moved. That takes the pressure off of the unassigned general fund. It's very easy to just throw things over to the general fund and say, Mayor, you pay for it. When the citizens are giving them a tax base in order for them to incur that and make them manage that budget a little bit more because it's restricted to them. It's money that is not being calculated as far as a subsidy request out of the general fund. If you've all had a chance to read that, those are the parks and firefighting. And that's where I'm basing my suggestion on. As far as the wages are concerned, all I wanted to do is give you an example. In the budget is a COLA. It's 1.3%. The reason that that's in there is because of the discussion that we had regarding doing a COLA to affect the maximum on the salary ranges that are established for every position. Because there were a lot more people now that are butting up against that salary range, and there hasn't been a COLA in about, what, 5 years or more, I think. So every budget that you see in here on the salary side will show you the current max for that position and the revised max as a result of the COLA. So this 1.3% moves the max. All right, it doesn't mean that we'll move everybody's salary to the max if they were at it. It just says that we're going to provide a COLA at the current rate that their salary is times the 1.3% to get the COLA. And if they were originally, before we had discussion of COLA, to get a 3% raise, we reduced the 3% by the 1.3%. And their 1.7 makes them whole for the 3% that was originally in the budget. So the COLA is neutral to the budget, but the 1.3% moves the max. And what that did is open up several positions for an increase that they haven't gotten in years, where we were considering on doing lump sums, which is basically a disguised compensation, which you can't do. Same thing for the staff down here. This rate plus the COLA was what was in the budget originally for that person. And we've looked at every position to make sure that this max is not exceeded. If it is, they get the COLA because it moves the max, it puts them right at the max. But it does not, it does not go over that max. Now that's all in except one case where I know. For instance, in the police department, there's a position that was at the max. Actually, now, because they took a lower position due to a different assignment that they had, they're over the max. They're actually right now over the max. However, that position is grant funded. So more than half the salary of that position is covered and reimbursed through a grant. So it's an anomaly, you had the word for it, it's an exception, something you told me, we used it for the last budget study session, but it's an unusual circumstance that we're addressing that way. So you have to look at that as an isolated situation. They're not really, if you reduce the salary that the city pays by the amount that they're getting reimbursed for that position specifically.
If the COLAs happen, we need to footnote in Wilma case that Ray was hurt by that. Yes, let's not forget.
Oh, I won't. It's up here in the steel trap.
Okay. I didn't see it in there.
No, she's not in there.
Yeah.
She's in a expense category.
Retirement.
But that would be so immaterial. It would come under your approval. As far as city sales and use tax is concerned, this was our 2020 unbelievable ride. It was amazing. Just so you know, we ended up the year from 2019 9% above, we entered coming in about 8 to 9% above where we were the previous year. And we attributed that before the pandemic happened to the online sales. So what we saw was a steady, it tracked pretty much the same as you would expect, just about anywhere between 7 to 9% higher. And then COVID hit. And what happened? Everybody noticed that the stores were closing. And when the stores were closing, they decided that it would be good to let their fingers do the walking and have a big brown truck come and deliver all their stuff that they would go to the store with. Well, the good news is we were getting the taxes from that. And they liked it. And they're continuing to do it. And I am happy about that. Because that's bringing the dollars here. Whereas before, they were getting in a car, they were driving to Fort Smith, they were going into a store, and they were giving Fort Smith that money. So as long as they can find items online, shop and buy, and have it delivered here, you're benefiting from it. So I will point out, it's tailing downward, and I will show you what we're looking at from the budget perspective. This was the hardest thing to try to budget, because we started at 9.1 and we had this little run up, and we ended the year at 16.1% above the previous year. Year over year, it was 16% higher. Our average is 3.5. So we did really good in city sales and use tax for the year. So COVID was not bad for us because of the way citizens of Greenwood adapted to the closures, and they didn't do without. They literally just adapted their purchasing. However, you look at July through December, and you look at year over year just for these two years, 19 and 20, and just for those 6 months, it was 15.6%, so it's not as high as the annual. And then when we looked at January, which we just received in, January's numbers is 14.2%, which you know is November's numbers, because we're about 2 months behind in our collections. So I don't have I would say I don't want to budget that flat. I don't want to budget 16.1% because I don't believe we're going to hit it. And I don't want to budget 14%. I would be a little bit queasy on a 12.5%. The current budget you have in front of you is 10%. We can modify that later if we see the trend going very positive. However, with the new administration and some of the things that we've seen and the job losses that you've heard about, that's going to impact people's discretionary spending. That city sales and use tax comes from people buying things. And if they see they're scared, they're not going to go out and buy discretionary stuff that they would otherwise be buying when they had a job. So I don't know what's going to happen, especially in our local market here. I'm watching that trend very closely, but right now, in the budget is 10. I would entertain anywhere between 10, maybe 11.5, maybe 12. 11.5 is where I think I threw it out at the last budget study session. I did not make that adjustment, so the budget numbers that you see, revenue and expense-wise, are sitting at a 10% increase in our city sales and use tax over the previous year. I mean, over the 2019 levels. It's actually a decrease of 6% from the current year ended. So instead of a 16% revenue stream, we're going to look at 10%. Is there any thought about whether that should go up or down, or do you agree?
Leave it at 10.
Leave it at 10? Yeah, because the numbers aren't bad at 10, and if I'm off, I'd rather be off lower than I would be higher. I'd rather not overestimate the revenue projection because there's spending decisions made on those projections. I'd rather be lower and you be a little more prudent in your decisions on needs and wants than you have a high number and you think we're going to hit that and we don't. So I'm a little more bullish though on the county sales side. I'm going to show that. We ended up in the muddied waters here in the early stages, and then you can see what happened afterwards with COVID. This, by the way, this whole thing you can move over 2 months, because that's really over here for the actual one. But you see, the number, the county sales tax took off. And what's interesting is that we ended the year at 5.5% for the 2020 year. 5.5%, it's actually 5.54%. I did the growth projections from July all the way to December, and the growth projection for just those, the growth actually between July and December was 8.9%. So the last 6 months of the year was even higher than the annual. I felt a little more comfortable in budgeting flat. So I'm budgeting flat. I'm budgeting 5.54% for the county sales tax side. County sales tax came in January at 6%. So as long as that number is a little higher than 5.54, I'm okay. So any questions on that?
Well, one question I have is, I guess going back to the very beginning, where you're saying the various actual to budget, you said it was just going to end up being up like 3%, 2.92%.
Revenue?
Yeah, on the revenue side. And I was thinking, shouldn't it have been higher since,
That's all
these-
in revenue. This is
Right.
only 52% of the city's revenue stream, county and city sales tax. That's only the county and city sales tax. That 3 point whatever percent comes from pavilion rental fees, fines from the, turnbacks from the state. That's not in those numbers. The only reason that I'm harping on these two, county and city sales tax, is that is the lion's share of what the city gets. Now remember, city sales and use tax only affects 4 departments, 4 areas. Water, sewer, parks, street, and one more. I'm missing one. Fire, of course! How did I miss them? Fire. Those are the 4. So every water sewer gets a permanent one, but the other 3, they have a sunset in 2026. So as far as long-range planning is concerned, that's a significant number because that's about more than a quarter, less than $500,000 every year. Absent of that money, you'd be looking at trying to come up with some creative ways to fund it. Then I wanted to show, we talked about the trends of the city. We talked about growing the city. Because, there's a couple things you can do in that next 3 years when we look at, are we going to have the same negative trend? You have to look at how do you grow the city? Do you grow the city? Do you cut expenses? If you do, you need to look first to cut expenses in areas that have the least impact on the city services and the impact to the citizens. The very first thing you need to do is you need to look at needs and wants. There's a lot of wants, and I know in this budget there's a lot of wants in the budget. But the question is, do you need it? If you need it, and you can justify that need, then you can convince me to keep it in that budget. If you want it and you can do well with what you currently have, it shouldn't be in that budget this year. It probably shouldn't be in the budget next year. You budget it when you need it, not when you just want it. That's a whole different philosophy change from what we're currently doing. We don't want to be putting any director in a position to think that it's a use it or lose it category, because you don't lose it. You have the ability to budget in the year that you want it, and that's in there because of the need. This is the building permits for the city of Fort Smith over the last 2014 to 2020 period of time. That's the trend line right there. The trend line is positive. This is Van Buren's. That's their trend line, positive. This is us. That's our building permits, and that's both residential and commercial combined. I could probably go and look at other things that would suggest that we're either growing or not growing the city, but this is a tall tale sign that the city is not necessarily growing. What makes me less doom and gloom is that I know there's a lot of things in the works right now that is turning that trend around. Not at liberty to say what they are, I don't really know all the details, but I do know that I have a little bit of a confidence level that that's not going to remain like that. With all of that said, absent of any other further discussions that you may have regarding some of the deals, I want to point out that contracts are in the budget, but you're going to have to, I don't know what the wording was that we're going to have to say, but the contracts will be presented for vote at the next meeting on Monday. The Boys Club, the Senior Center, that all those contracts, you're going to have to approve them. Some of the things that are in the budget is as you saw back on this county sales tax screen right here, is the Boys and Girls Club increase from 51,000 to 75,000. Contract language is going to have some verbiage in there that's going to restrict 24,000 to capital and keep 51,000 for their unrestricted operations. That's already in the budget. Senior Center's in the budget with not to exceed language for repairs and maintenance and/or two things, repairs and maintenance and utilities. Yeah, we didn't limit each one, we collectively limited them to a dollar amount that could be split amongst both categories. We'll present that at the meeting. So this budget includes it, but the contract is what you're going to have to hash out. And if it's, I forgot what that language was. Do you remember what you told me we have to say because of these numbers in here?
Well, it will be included in the budget, but it doesn't have to happen until they approve it.
Yeah, so,
It won't be spent until they approve the contract.
yeah, we're going to, you
Plan
can
for it.
approve the budget, but
You're planning for
you
it.
are still going to approve the contracts. So the contract might be different than what you have in that budget, is what I'm trying to say. By merely approving the budget, you're not approving those contracts. That's what I want to get across.
The money's approved, is not the contract.
Correct. All
Well, you've also
of it.
got that.
That's what I meant to say.
That resolution for the 1.3% and amending the salaries and all that will have to be done at the next meeting.
Yes, because y'all didn't adopt it. It's on your tablets though. That one that was a draft proposed resolution that had language in it to increase those minimum maximums every time a COLA is approved. Is in there if you want to look at it. To talk about. When you talk about salaries.
At the last budget study session, you also made a comment about just merely approving this doesn't preclude you from analyzing or revisiting the salary ranges in the future this year and then making an adjustment at that time. So you can always do that. But this is one step. You can revisit that at a later date.
All right, and we can make any kind of adjustments, to the budget, if we need to. What we approved today, it's not set in concrete, we can adjust it.
Right.
We're even talking about doing a quarterly thing, where we all, kind of make you see where the budget is versus revenue versus expenses and stuff, and where we stand. You need to make any kind of adjustments.
I am happy to say that most of the departments that I had the opportunity to sit down with, I know they have now they're working on 3- and 5-year plans. I know that, for instance, the street department is looking at where their capital needs are over the next, all the way up to 10 years from now. And they do know that they're butting up against a sunset on the city sales and use tax as well. So we're doing some long-range planning. I'd like to get that way with all departments that have capital needs that are significant.
Tom, on the revenue side, on state turnbacks, so census figures are due back to the states July the 31st. believe. And we figured we'd grown 8-9% from what we did last year. You have no projection in this budget of,
We have the AML projection of what the state turnback was. That's what we budgeted, was what we got from them, but it could change.
I just saw a chart where we weren't growing.
what's that?
I just saw a chart where we weren't growing.
Well, building permit.
Turnback, that's building.
We're talking about population, the population of Greenwood is going to be 8-9% more than it was 10 years ago. So ideally, you figure whatever we're getting, and we should be getting more money back after July 31st. And also, we will get a larger share of county sales tax because we'll be a larger town within the county. And you have no projection of what that might be.
What you don't know is how much did the other cities?
How much did the other county?
Your percentage went up, but the others went up more. Your share isn't going to be impacted by that significantly.
So just because the building permit chart showed us going down doesn't mean we're not growing. And that's kind of what I was led to believe.
You're not growing the city necessarily from a residential
10 years
perspective.
ago.
You can't just say, well, because our revenues are up, our city's growing.
Correct.
That just means that cost of good, if prices go up and people still buy it, your city sales and use tax is going up because it's based on that cost.
Well,
What I'm going to tell you is going to impact you. You can't do the converse to that. You can't say our city sales and use tax is down, therefore our city's not growing. Because what it could be an indicator of is that people aren't spending and therefore your tax collections are down. So same amount of people. So you can't use the revenue stream necessarily as a good indicator of whether you're growing your city. But what building permits show you is what's coming into this city to bring people. What's coming, how many residential permits are going to relocate people to live within the city? That's going to grow your revenue stream because they're going to pay taxes. They're going to pay property taxes. They're going to do buying in locally. Your AMP is going to reflect an increase. You need to bring people in here. Now, I don't know necessarily if you're getting your 80%.
That's, we better get to annexing some property if we're gonna do that.
We talked about
Bottom line, because I've been in this business a long time, and Greenwood ain't got that many places left in the city limits to put anything of any substantial size.
it. You don't have to convince
We don't have the
me.
infrastructure, we don't have the water, we don't have the sewer, we don't have none of that. So you gotta have it to offer them before they're gonna come.
Okay, but you're not having this necessarily, you're not convincing me. You're not trying to convince me. I'm merely showing you the numbers. You guys figure it out.
I understand that, I'm just saying, we're gonna have to expand our horizon because
To them,
we've been preaching it for, I don't know how long. It ain't that we're not trying, we've been preaching for that, I don't know how long.
I'm not saying you're not trying. I never said that. It's on record. All I'm saying is, I'm just giving you the numbers.
I understand that, but I'm just telling you the facts on the
I
real,
said
you
you
got
have to-
out in the real world,
you have to-
we got to get someplace for somebody to do this.
You have to increase your revenues or decrease your expenses or a combination of both. That's how you grow, that's how you basically manage this city. So if you start seeing negative trends, yeah, the first easy thing to do, which we talked about at the last budget study session, is go right to the expenses and start cutting expenses. If you do that, you need to start first at those that have the least impact on city services to the citizens and/or the employees that generate those services to the citizens. You have to realize that there's a lot of things that you could do that are fat, not necessary, things that you could take out of the budget immediately and have a pretty significant impact. Wants and needs. Okay, that's all I'm saying. It's for you guys to discuss it. I don't have a magic wand that can change this scenario or situation. You know the city's dynamics better than I do. I know the numbers. And I'm telling you, you're going to have to figure out in 3 years how to turn that percentage decline down. Turn it up so that it grows.
But it also comes to the fact that when we start growing, you start acquiring more expense because you're gonna have to put more police officers, you're gonna have to start providing fire protection, and you got water, you got streets, you're gonna start taking care of that we don't take care of now out here that we start having. So it's a domino effect. We start bringing in more money, but we gain more expenses.
So are you saying we shouldn't grow the city? Is that, was that?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that when you do that, you're going to require more expenses.
So you're not saying why do it?
No, I'm not saying that at all, Tom. What I'm saying,
I
the
just
bottom
wanted to
line
make sure,
is, if
'cause-
you go out and annex all this property, just like taking over 10 Spur, if this bypass goes through, we're gonna have to start maintaining it. We have to maintain it, and we have the manpower and the equipment to maintain.
We're already working.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, that's part of the long-range plan. Remember, when I first came here, I said, you didn't have a 5-year plan. You don't have a 3-year plan. No one presented me a
We
3
didn't
or
have a
5-year
5-minute
plan.
plan.
Pardon?
We didn't have a 5-minute plan.
Pretty much. And so we're taking baby steps to get there.
I
and I'm
understand, but I'm just
showing
saying,
you
though,
that
we're gonna require more expenses if we start growing the city. And
I'm not-
I'm all for that.
I'm not.
I've said it a lot of times, you gotta spend money to make money.
I'm not beating you up. You guys have to figure it out.
So which prompts, you're exactly right, and he's exactly right. But, so what we talked about last time was, and I know.
And I apologize for not being here because I'm behind the eight ball here on this deal, but I'm just saying that's my outlook on that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I had to get
So
off.
what will prompt, what you're talking about is going to prompt meetings, and I know meetings can just be meetings, but these meetings will be significant in the fact that we will have study sessions. We talked about this a little bit about,
Oh, yeah.
we do your work,
Forgot.
about the growth and how, and literally get it out from the table, you know. There are areas, not many, but, and echo what you said about things in planning stages, and I promise you there are. All those plans can fall apart tomorrow, tonight, next week, but there are some significant plans to help. So I guess what I'm saying is just we're gonna start meeting and talking about those things, whether it's a council meeting or study session or whatever we do. And you touched on, you said it, it's infrastructure. You know, and I'm gonna, not to correct you, but I guess I am, not if, but when the bypass happens, it's happening. It's happening.
Well, I mean,
But we're all wondering why, when, but I call every day to find out when. So, good point. We gotta get serious, we gotta get a plan, we gotta figure out what's the first step, how much we're gonna spend to make it happen. 'Cause there's nothing more logical than you gotta spend it to make it happen. I think Tom, or Bob, sorry,
Phil.
Bill, Susan,
John.
whatever. Another meeker. And to go there, can speak a little bit, I guess, on census, and we don't want to hang our hat on it, because we don't know yet, but hopefully there's going to be an increase, but who knows? I think we're wondering if we're going to bump the 10 still yet, right? You don't have anything official yet. Anyway, it's all about how much we're going to spend to make it happen. And of course, you are exactly right. What you gain is you gain all of that stuff.
I will point one other thing out. I thought that's where you were going, but you prompted.
I probably was, I probably lost it.
Well, no, you got me on the right track. At the last meeting, if you were not at, and neither were you, we discussed what can we do in order to manage and monitor this budget other than once a year when we sit down and you see the financials every month. We're going to adopt the philosophy, I think we got an agreement with those that were here, that quarterly we're going to sit down and do quarterly budget reviews. And this is a special called budget session where we're going to sit down and we're going to say, where are we? Where are we against the budget? What's trending positive? What's trending negative? That's what I can provide to you so that you can see, what do we need to tweak? How do we address this? What are we going to do to make a change? Let's get ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve and wait for a year to go by before then we start addressing it. And so we're going to schedule that for April.
I thought you did that every month anyway, pretty well.
Well, thank you.
We get a budget update every month. And you kind of give us a little-
Well, this is going to be not necessarily just the financials. It's going to be against budget. It's going to be talking about each department, where are they, highlighting some of their strengths and weaknesses. What's a project that's lagging behind? What's a project that's not? Is this something that we need to maybe look at pushing a project off because the one is overrun by increases? What we're trying to do is prevent them every time coming to you with a request to increase the budget. Hey, we're going to buy this and we need this and here's how much. And we just go, okay, move the budget. Where are you getting the funding? All right.
Lance, too, I want to just, this may not seem budget talk, but it is, in my opinion, for sure, that the council somehow meets and/or communicates, and myself, better with commissions/committees. These commissions and committees can talk and work all day long and not be on the same page as the council. Not only that bad, I'm just saying, they're working on something and you guys may not even know about it. So I think there's a lack of, I don't know.
There has been that from the.
Yeah, so I'm working on fixing that. I won't be able to fix it by myself, but we got to fix that.
So this is balanced budget, yes, and, other than the COLA and any other big things, how can we move on with this?
Well, one thing I guess probably in fact, I'm not moving on, when you, going back there to page 6, you know, when you're talking about budgeted compensation. And in 2021, you said that, it shows there that the budget compensation is just 1.3%.
All in cities.
And all in the city. And so, if we roll all salary increases and everything, it just still comes out just to be 1.3%.
Over last year's. It's a big number. It's just 1.3% over last year.
And then you said there was the other 1.7 that's in under the merit, whatever you call it.
That salary compensation includes all in COLA and merit. That is the total compensation.
You mentioned the 3%, 1.3 COLA, 1.7 requested merit incentive adjustment.
Yeah, just like there, that one example you were showing there, it still showed like a 1.7 spot. I guess I'm kind of lost. How can we have a COLA and then also show a 1.7?
If 3% was requested by a director or myself, he's taking a, whatever that is, COLA. Instead of them getting a 3% and a possible COLA,
When we did the budget, we weren't talking COLA. We were talking incentives, period. So they said, well, I'm giving the director a 3% raise. And so everybody went, okay, everything's fine, budget's good, okay, go for it. And then we started a COLA discussion because there were some departments when we got to it, they had people that were above the max, or no, not above the max, hitting the max and they couldn't get any raises. So we started talking about, well, what about a cost of living increase? And I think that conversation came up specifically with the police department. And they presented a big, long, just to give you a little history, a big, long schedule about here's where the COLA would have been. And, you know, giving a COLA raise is basically saying we're going to keep your salary up with the cost of milk. I think you used the milk conversation. So we looked at the COLA, and you guys decided that you wanted to make a consideration as to moving the max by the percentage of the COLA based on what the federal government's guideline is for what they're saying the cost of living adjustment should be. So what we did in order to keep the budget that you already said was okay, the 3% for instance on the director, this is just one example, is that we took from the 3%, which this number used to be 3%, now it's 1.7 because the 1.7 and the 1.3 is the 3%. The only thing this is doing is moving the max. That's all it does. They're getting 3%, and that 3% is in that compensation number.
I guess that's what kind of loses me, because I'm thinking, so if we had a 1.3, and then, you know, in some ways it shows there's a 1.7, and then one below that says 2.7 and 2.67. I said then, I just don't still see how if you roll them all together, it still just comes out to be 1.3%.
The 1.3 is the amount of the increase from year to year in the actual compensation. It's not individuals amount. So it's a significant number. It just happened to come out to be the same number as the COLA. They're not, they're apples and oranges. You can't really look at that. I just said, coincidentally, it just happens to be what the cost of living was. But if you go to, trust me, that number, if you add up all the salaries, that number is $3.1 million. That's what we're spending. By the way, A third of the money that we have in expense is capital related. A third of the money we have in expense is employee related. One of the second biggest assets you have in the city. The buildings, the employees. There's your 2/3 of your expense is covered by those two major expenses. The third is operational. So about a third, or 33% of the expenses to the city is to operate those departments. That's typical. That's normal in any kind of a budget system. Payroll is usually about a third of the cost of operating any kind of a business. And you're right in line with that. So I'm happy with the budget. I'm happy. This amount right here, they're saying this 2.7 and 1.3, that's 4%. Now remember, that 4% is on $30-something thousand. It's not on big numbers, but the 1.3% is on the big numbers. So it's apples and oranges when you're trying to look at that, where we hit versus individuals. So this 4% was in the original budget, and it's actually on this person that would have gotten a lump sum distribution, which we don't do anymore. You're seeing this 2.7 and 1.3. That dollar amount is exactly what they would have gotten before COLA. It's the same way we did it for every department. You can go to every department in that budget and look at every wage salary schedule, and you will see every individual and what their min-max is. What their max is.
So, let me just hypothetically, next year, the federal government COLA number is 2%.
Right?
So everybody's gonna get 2% of that COLA line.
No, that's up to you.
I mean, I think we kind of all agree that we'd like to go with COLA instead of a random 8% in this incentive line that we've been seeing over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years.
No, we were saying that it's gonna raise the min-max, salary chart.
Well, we wanted to
But
just.
to your point though, I think, Tim, yes, theoretically, this budget next year would be absent that merit incentive.
Right.
I don't think you want to go there.
In
Because
theory.
you take away the ability to reward good performance on a performance-based department.
That would be the exception though. You know, maybe the column doesn't go away, but it gets a whole lot less populated. Everybody would get a 2% COLA.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that when we come to next year's budget and where we stand.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that the discussion you guys are going to end up having to decide is based on what you currently have in your tablets for the resolution, which is if you give a COLA, adjust the max, versus every year the cost of living adjusts the max and you decide if you want to give a COLA. So the max is a living document. It moves, the salary ranges move, min and max, with the COLAs.
Really, max is kind of an oxymoron, that term.
Well, no, it's a
In
max.
that, because it's not really a max.
It is. It's just it's a living maximum based on cost of living.
But they'll never reach the max.
There's some years there's no COLA raise.
Some years it
Well,
gets to be.
it's a max, it's a max for that year, right?
Right.
You could have, I'm in favor of what Tom said second. That's been my opinion of that from the get-go. You could have a year that,
We discussed the merit.
We don't do a COLA.
The pool money and who gets what percent. I think we talked about Dennis having a 12% pool, and other department had an 8% pool. We should discuss that pool thing here in one of these sessions for a while. And and whether you might give all one employee or give everybody 4% or of that pool, or however you want to split it up. Ultimately, that's on us to give them the pool money, basically is what I think we're getting at.
And the pool money argument was that they didn't have to spend it, although I would prefer that they actually assign it, so that you know what those are by individuals. That would be my preference.
I think the council give them a COLA raise is pretty good praise to the employees.
actual rate.
Like,
You know, and if there's no other questions,
Get started.
I've never ate in a long time.
you know what that is?
I need to get a minimum wage job, yes.
I can give you some references.
Cost of living is not a raise.
Yeah, just remember that. COLA just keeps up with the cost of a gallon of milk.
I'm just one vote.
The only person that's getting a COLA raise is who's at the max.
I can say
Cola and a Kohler.
No R.
What's at hand is, if you want my opinion, and it's just my opinion, you guys can choose to accept it or not, is that I think the budget presented right now is doable, livable, and I'm satisfied with it. Much more satisfied than I was a couple weeks ago.
That being said, I make a motion that we adopt the
Second.
resolution.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this budget as presented.
Like Terry?
Well, I gotta get this out first. I'm gonna, because I haven't been here for the last two meetings, so I'm a little behind the eight ball, like I said, what we discussed. So I'm gonna abstain from voting this because I'm not real sure what all y'all talked about, so some of it I'm not comfortable with anyway, so I'm just gonna abstain.
Same. Rob Powell?
Yes.
Daniel Denton?
Yes.
Tim Terry?
Yes.
Mr. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Passes 5-0.
And it's just so you know, you have the right later to adjust the budget as you guys see fit, so.
But I also know y'all had some lengthy discussions and I don't like this, so that's just my.
That's fine.
We'll discuss it.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll discuss it later.
Yeah, well,
Thank you, Tom, for a lot of work. I didn't open his door this week because I knew you were working hard. Well, maybe not just this week. Anyway, thank you very much for preparing it. Thank you, council, for approving it. And thank you, Charlotte Dairy, for the scrumptious food, which I have only taken 2 bites, so I'm going to microwave or with my bowl.
She told me I couldn't get up, so that's
Oh,
all.
really? Okay.
fat man, now.
I'm fixing to hit the hammer. But I want to thank you on behalf of the employees of the city of Greenwood. Thank you very much. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
Second.
You are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Only an hour and 40 minutes.
This is short. I thought at least, you know. I said no.
Who knows what will happen?